Daniel Prescott threw his wife, Alice, into a freezing New York rainstorm with a settlement of exactly $0, believing her silence was submission. He saw her as a penniless orphan he could easily replace with a younger model. He was fatally mistaken. The woman he had forced to scrub his floors was not just a housewife. She was a force of nature in hiding. When she finally revealed her true name in court, the blood didn't just drain from Daniel's face, it froze the entire room. You are not ready for who she really is. The sound of the Patek Philippe watch hitting the marble countertop echoed like a gunshot in the silent penthouse. "Take it," Daniel Prescott said, his voice devoid of the warmth it had held 3 years ago. "Sell it. That's your severance package. Now get out." Alice stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse overlooking Central Park. Outside, a torrential October storm was battering the city, turning the skyline into a blur of grey and angry charcoal. She looked down at the watch, a gift she had bought him with money she saved from her allowance, and then up at the man she had loved for 5 years. Daniel wasn't looking at her. He was adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit, checking his reflection in the darkened glass. At 34, he was the CEO of Prescott Mining, a company that had quadrupled in value since their marriage. He looked powerful, untouchable, and utterly bored. "Daniel," Alice whispered, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a shock so cold it felt like hypothermia. "It's 11 p.m. It's pouring rain. I have nowhere to go." "Not my problem," a sharp, aristocratic voice cut in from the hallway. Beatrice Prescott, Daniel's mother, walked into the living room. She was holding a glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the light of the chandelier. She didn't look at Alice. She looked through her, as if Alice were a stain on the pristine white rug. "You've had a free ride for 3 years, Alice," Beatrice sneered, taking a sip. "You came from nothing. No parents, no lineage, no money. My son plucked you out of that diner in Brooklyn and gave you a life of luxury. And how do you repay him? By being inadequate." Alice's hands clenched at her sides. "Inadequate? I managed this household. I nursed you, Beatrice, through your hip surgery when no nurse would tolerate your abuse. I helped Daniel organize the merger with the structural data I'd— "Stop lying!" Daniel spun around, his eyes flashing with irritation. "You organized nothing. You're a high school graduate, Alice. You made coffee. That's it. My lawyers did the merger. Don't take credit for intellect you don't possess." He walked over to the coffee table and picked up a thick stack of documents. "This," Daniel said, slapping the papers against his palm, "is the divorce filing, and the enforcement of the prenuptial agreement you signed." "I signed it because I loved you," Alice said softly. "I didn't care about the money." "Good," Daniel smirked, "because Clause 14b states that, in the event of a divorce initiated by the primary asset holder, me, if the marriage is less than 5 years, you leave with only the assets you brought into the marriage." He tossed the papers at her feet. They scattered across the floor. "You brought nothing, Alice, so you leave with nothing." The elevator dinged, the doors slid open, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, blonde, and wearing a red dress that cost more than the house Alice grew up in. It was Lila Monroe, the daughter of a senator, and Daniel's head of PR. Lila didn't say a word. She just walked past Alice, her perfume, something heavy and floral, filling the air. She went straight to Daniel and placed a possessive hand on his chest. "Is the trash still here, Danny?" Lila asked, pouting slightly. "I thought we were celebrating." Daniel smiled at her, a genuine smile that broke Alice's heart into a million irreparable shards. "She was just leaving, Lila." Alice looked at the 3 of them. The husband she had supported when he was stressed and near bankruptcy 2 years ago. The mother-in-law she had cared for. The woman who had stolen her life. A strange calm settled over Alice. The tears that had threatened to spill suddenly evaporated. Her posture straightened. She didn't reach for the watch on the counter. She didn't pick up the papers. She walked to the coat rack, put on her simple beige trench coat, and buttoned it all the way to the chin. "You're making a mistake, Daniel," Alice said. Her voice was no longer trembling. It was flat, clinical. Daniel laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "The only mistake I made was marrying a waitress without a background check. Get out, Alice, before I call security to drag you out." "That won't be necessary." Alice turned to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle. She didn't look back. "I hope you enjoy the company, Daniel. You deserve each other." She stepped out into the hallway. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, the sound of the deadbolt sliding home sealing her fate. She took the elevator down to the lobby. The doorman, a kind man named Henry, who had always liked her, looked at her with concern. "Mrs. Prescott, it's a hurricane out there. Do you need a car?" "I'm not Mrs. Prescott anymore, Henry," she said softly. "And no, I'll walk." She pushed open the lobby doors and the wind hit her like a physical blow. The rain soaked her instantly. She had no umbrella, no phone. Daniel had paid for it, so he had kept it. No cash, and nowhere to sleep. She walked 3 blocks, her cheap canvas shoes squelching in the puddles. She found a bus stop shelter and sat down on the cold metal bench, shivering. She sat there for 20 minutes, watching the limousine splash by. Then she reached into the hidden inner pocket of her trench coat. She pulled out a small, burner flip phone. It was an old device, one she had kept hidden for 3 years. She powered it on. The battery was at 12%. She dialed a number from memory, a number that hadn't been called in a very long time. It rang once, twice. "This is the private line of Arthur Sterling," a gruff, deep voice answered. "Who is this?" Alice took a deep breath, watching the rain wash away the dirt of the last 3 years. "Uncle Arthur," she said. "It's Alice. Initiate Protocol 0. I'm coming home." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of a chair scraping back, and a heavy exhale of relief. "My God, kid, we thought you were dead. Where are you?" "New York," Alice said, her eyes fixing on the distant lights of the Prescott Tower. "And Arthur, get the legal team ready. The sharks are circling, but they don't know they're in the water with a Leviathan." The next 3 weeks were a blur of tabloid humiliation for the discarded Cinderella. Daniel's PR machine, led efficiently by Lila, went to work immediately. They planted stories in the New York Chronicle and the Daily Post. The headlines were brutal. "Gold digger dumped. How Alice Hale tried to swindle the Prescott fortune. From diner to divorce, the waitress who wanted it all." They painted her as lazy, uneducated, and potentially unfaithful. They claimed she had tried to steal company secrets. They claimed she was unstable. Alice read none of it. She was staying in a suite at the Pierre Hotel, paid for by a shell corporation that couldn't be traced back to her. She hadn't left the room in days. Arthur Sterling sat across from her, his white hair perfectly coiffed, his 3-piece suit impeccable. Arthur wasn't just an uncle. He was the managing partner of Sterling, Hunt and Associates, the most feared corporate law firm in London and Zurich. "They have filed for a court date on November 15th, Arthur said, reviewing a dossier. "They want to expedite the divorce. Daniel wants to marry Lila by Christmas. They are petitioning for an annulment based on fraud, claiming you misrepresented your background to entrap him." Alice sat by the window, sipping Earl Grey tea. She looked different. The beige trench coat and simple dresses were gone. She was wearing a structured navy blazer, tailored trousers, and her hair, usually kept in a messy bun for Daniel's preference, was blown out straight and sharp. Fraud, Alice mused, a small, cold smile playing on her lips. That's ironic. They have no idea, do they? Arthur asked, looking at her over his spectacles. Daniel? Beatrice? The girl. They haven't done a deep background check? They did a standard check, Alice said. They found Alice Hale, born in Ohio, parents deceased in a car crash, worked as a waitress in Brooklyn. It's all true, legally. But it's not the whole truth, Arthur reminded her. No, it's not. Alice stood up and walked to the wall where Arthur had pinned up the organizational chart of Prescott Mining. When I met Daniel, Alice said, tracing the line of stock value, I wanted to be loved for me. Not for my name, not for the legacy. I wanted to know if a man could love a waitress with nothing to offer but her heart. And you got your answer, Arthur said gently. I did. Alice turned back to him. Her eyes were dry. The sadness was gone, replaced by a steely resolve that Arthur recognized. It was the same look her father used to have before he acquired a hostile competitor. Daniel thinks he built Prescott Mining, Alice said. He thinks his genius saved the company 2 years ago when they struck that lithium vein in Nevada. Arthur chuckled. The vein that the Geological Survey team, which we quietly funded and sent to him anonymously, found. Exactly, Alice said, and the bridge loan that stopped them from going under in 2023, the one from the anonymous angel investor in Zurich. That was your trust fund, Alice, Arthur said. You poured $40 million into his company to save his ego. I saved my husband, she corrected, or who I thought was my husband. She walked back to the table and picked up a heavy file. He wants a war, Arthur. He wants to drag Alice the waitress through the mud to show the world how powerful he is. He wants to strip me of my dignity because he thinks that's all I have left. She tossed the file to Arthur. Let's give him what he wants. Let him think he's winning. I want no settlements. I want no mediation. I want to go to court. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You want a public trial? It will be messy. I want it public, Alice said. I want the press there. I want the cameras. I want the shareholders of Prescott Mining to be present. Why? Because, Alice said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, I don't just want a divorce, Arthur. I want a hostile takeover, and I'm going to do it while I'm on the stand. Arthur smiled, a shark-like grin that terrified his opponents. I'll file the response. We'll represent you? No, Alice said. If Sterling, Hunt and Associates represents me, they'll get suspicious. They know your firm. They know you only represent the European elite. Then who? I'll represent myself, Alice said. Let them think I'm too poor to afford a lawyer. Let Daniel's shark, Harrison Cole, think he's going to tear apart a helpless woman. It will make the moment I drop the hammer so much sweeter. Harrison Cole is vicious, Alice. He's known as the Butcher of Broadway. He will humiliate you. He can try, Alice said. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The naive waitress was gone. Harrison Cole destroys victims, Arthur. But he's never faced a Winthrop. November 15th arrived with a biting chill that froze the puddles on the Manhattan sidewalks. The steps of the New York State Supreme Court were a circus. Daniel Prescott had ensured the media was there. He wanted this to be a public execution of his wife's character, a warning to anyone else who might try to claim a piece of his growing empire. He arrived in a convoy of 3 black SUVs. He stepped out first, looking every inch the billionaire victim, wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit and sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. Lila Monroe was on his arm, dressed in a white suit that looked suspiciously like a bridal outfit. She waved to the paparazzi, flashing a smile that was practiced and predatory. Beatrice followed, looking grim and superior in mink. Inside courtroom 304, the gallery was packed. Shareholders, reporters from the Financial Times and TMZ alike, and curious onlookers filled every bench. The air smelled of wet wool and expensive cologne. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. The Honourable Judge Harlan Banks took the bench. He was an older man, known for favouring the establishment, a detail Daniel's legal team had undoubtedly counted on. Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Harrison Cole and 3 junior associates. Cole was a man who looked like a bulldog stuffed into a suit, broad, bald, and radiating aggression. He was arranging his papers with the confidence of a man who had already won. At the defendant's table there was only one chair. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The room went silent, anticipating the entrance of the weeping ex-wife. Alice walked in. She wasn't weeping. She wasn't wearing the rags they expected, nor the flashy designer clothes she used to wear to please Daniel. She wore a vintage black dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, tailored to perfection. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She carried a single, battered leather briefcase. She walked down the aisle, the click of her heels the only sound in the room. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at Daniel, who was whispering something to Lila and snickering. Alice took her seat at the empty table. She placed the briefcase down and sat with her back straight, hands folded on the table. "Case number 77B, Prescott v. Prescott," Judge Banks announced, looking over his reading glasses. "Counsel for the plaintiff?" "Harrison Cole, representing Mr. Daniel Prescott," Cole boomed, standing up. "And counsel for the defendant?" The judge looked at Alice, scanning the empty seats beside her. "Mrs. Prescott, is your attorney late?" Alice stood up slowly. "I have no attorney, Your Honor. I will be representing myself." A ripple of laughter went through the gallery. Daniel shook his head, a pitying smile on his face. Cole actually chuckled audibly. "Mrs. Prescott," Judge Banks said, his tone condescending. "This is a high-stakes divorce, proceeding involving complex assets and prenuptial agreements. I strongly advise you to seek counsel. Mr. Prescott has employed one of the top firms in the city." "I am aware of Mr. Cole's reputation," Alice said, her voice clear and calm, carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "But as my husband has frozen all my bank accounts and cancelled my credit cards, I cannot afford a retainer. Therefore, I must rely on my own capabilities." "Very well," the judge sighed, clearly annoyed at the prospect of a messy amateur trial. "But I will not grant leniency on procedure. Mr. Cole, your opening statement." Harrison Cole strode to the center of the floor, buttoning his jacket. He turned to the gallery, treating them like a jury. "Your Honor, this case is simple," Cole began, pacing. "It is a case of fraud. 3 years ago, Daniel Prescott, a man of vision and industry, met a woman. He believed her to be honest. He believed her to be supportive. He lifted her from poverty, gave her a home, clothes, jewelry, a life most only dream of. He pointed a thick finger at Alice. In return, she offered nothing, no support, no ambition. And when Mr. Prescott's company faced a crisis 2 years ago, she didn't offer help. She offered spending bills. She is a leech, Your Honor. And now that Mr. Prescott has rightfully ended this sham of a marriage, she refuses to leave quietly. She demands half of a fortune she didn't earn. We are here to enforce the prenuptial agreement and grant Mr. Prescott an annulment based on material misrepresentation." Cole paused for dramatic effect. "We will prove that Alice Prescott is nothing more than a grifter who trapped a good man. He sat down to a murmur of approval from the shareholders in the audience. Mrs. Prescott? The judge looked at her. Your opening statement? Alice stood up again. She didn't pace. She didn't gesture. She looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Cole is right about one thing, Alice said softly. This case is about fraud, but he is wrong about who committed it. She paused, letting the silence hang. I do not want half of Daniel's money. I do not want alimony. I do not want the penthouse. Daniel frowned. If she didn't want money, what was she doing here? I am here, Alice continued, to correct the record and to reclaim what is legally mine, not under the laws of marriage, but under the laws of equity and contract. Objection, Cole barked, standing up halfway. Vague. Overruled, the judge said, curious. Proceed. I have no further opening statement, Alice said, sitting down. The courtroom buzzed with confusion. Was she giving up? Was she crazy? Call your first witness, Mr. Cole, the judge said. I call Daniel Prescott to the stand. Daniel adjusted his tie and walked to the witness box. He swore to tell the truth. He looked handsome, confident, the picture of American success. Cole led him through a rehearsed series of questions. Daniel painted a picture of a marriage where he worked 18-hour days while Alice shopped and complained. He described how he built the company from the ground up. And 2 years ago, when the company nearly went under, Cole asked, how did you save it? Daniel puffed out his chest. It was hard. I had to leverage everything. I worked day and night to find investors. Finally, I secured a private equity injection from a Swiss trust. It was my reputation that closed the deal. The Zurich Angel, they called it. They bet on me. And did Alice help with this? Alice? Daniel laughed. She was at a spa in the Hamptons while I was negotiating the deal of a lifetime. She didn't even know we were in trouble. Thank you, Mr. Prescott. Cole sat down, looking smug. Mrs. Prescott, the judge said, do you have any questions for the witness? Alice stood up. She picked up a single piece of paper from her table. Yes, Your Honor. Just a few. She walked toward the witness stand. Daniel looked down at her with a mix of boredom and annoyance. Daniel, she said, using his first name. You mentioned the Zurich Angel, the investor who saved the company in 2023. I did. That investment was for $40 million, correct? Yes. And it was a debt-for-equity swap, was it not? Alice asked. Daniel hesitated. This was technical financial jargon. Essentially, yes. Meaning, Alice pressed, her voice hardening, that if the loan was not repaid by a certain date, the investor would convert that debt into stock, controlling stock, 51% of the company. That's standard boilerplate. Daniel waved his hand dismissively. It doesn't matter because we are profitable now. We can service the debt. Have you serviced the debt? Alice asked. Have you made the payments? My CFO handles that. Of course we have. Are you sure? Alice tilted her head. Because under the terms of the agreement, if you miss 3 consecutive payments, the acceleration clause kicks in. The entire amount becomes due immediately, or the equity transfers. We haven't missed payments, Daniel snapped, looking at Cole. Cole looked a little uneasy. He hadn't reviewed the financials personally. He was a divorce lawyer, not a corporate one. Let's move on, Alice said, turning away. You claim I brought no assets into the marriage, that I was just a waitress. You were. And you claim I am uneducated. You have a high school diploma, Alice. Don't pretend you're a scholar. Okay. Alice walked back to her table and picked up another document. One last question, Daniel. Do you know who owns the building where Prescott Mining is headquartered? The skyscraper in Midtown? We lease it, Daniel said. "From a holding company, Skyline Properties." "And do you know who owns Skyline Properties?" "No. Some real estate mogul. Why does this matter?" "No further questions," Alice said, sitting down. Daniel stared at her. He felt a prickle of unease on the back of his neck. She wasn't fighting about the dog or the jewelry. She was asking about corporate debt and real estate. "The plaintiff rests," Cole said, trying to regain momentum. "We ask for a summary judgment." "Denied," the judge said. "The defendant may present her case." Alice stood up. The room went deadly quiet. "I call myself to the stand," she said. Alice sat in the witness box. She looked small against the dark wood, but her eyes were sharp. "Mrs. Prescott," Judge Banks said, "you may give your testimony." "I would like to submit into evidence Defense Exhibit A," Alice said. She pulled a thick binder from her briefcase and handed it to the bailiff. Cole snatched the copy the bailiff handed him. "What is this?" "These are bank statements," Alice said calmly into the microphone, "specifically the transaction records for the Zurich Angel Trust." Cole flipped the pages. Objection, relevance, and lack of foundation. Where did she get these? "These are confidential banking documents from Switzerland." "I have the foundation," Alice said, "because I have the access keys." "Overruled for now," the judge said, leaning forward. "Explain, Mrs. Prescott." "Daniel claimed I was at a spa when his company was failing," Alice said, looking at the jury gallery, then directly at the camera lens of a news crew. "I was actually in Zurich. I was meeting with the trustees of my family estate." "Your family estate?" Cole laughed, a loud, mocking sound. "You're an orphan from Ohio. Your father was a mechanic." "My stepfather was a mechanic," Alice corrected him. "He adopted me when I was 3. He was a wonderful man. But my biological father—" She paused. "My biological father died before I was born. My mother ran away from his family because they were too controlling. She wanted a simple life. She died when I was young, and I was raised not knowing who he was." "This is a touching sob story," Cole interrupted. "But we are on a schedule." "I found out who he was 4 years ago," Alice continued, her voice gaining strength. "Just before I met Daniel. The lawyers found me. They told me I was the sole heir to a rather significant lineage." Daniel was listening now. His face was pale. "I didn't want the money to change me," Alice said, "and I didn't want men to want me for it. So I kept my name. I kept my job at the diner. I met Daniel. I fell in love. And when he needed help, I authorized the transfer." "Lies!" Daniel stood up, slamming his hand on the table. "She's lying. She's delusional. She doesn't have $40 million. "Mr. Prescott, sit down," the judge roared. "Mr. Cole," the judge said, "cross-examine the witness. Expose the lie if it is one." Cole walked up to the stand. He looked like a predator sensing blood. He thought she was bluffing. He thought this was a desperate Hail Mary. "Mrs. Prescott," Cole sneered, "you expect this court to believe that you, a woman who was scrubbing floors last week, are a secret heiress? Who was your father?" "I'll get to that," Alice said. "No, tell us now." "I want to finish discussing the debt," Alice said coolly. "Mr. Cole, did you check the payment records for the Prescott mining loan?" "I did not," Cole said. "My client says they are paid." "Your client is wrong." Alice pulled a single sheet of paper from her pocket. "This is a notice of default, dated 3 days ago. Prescott Mining has missed not 3, but 4 payments. The funds were diverted." She looked at Lila Monroe in the gallery. "Diverted to a private account in the Cayman Islands, an account under the name Lila Monroe." The courtroom erupted. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel froze. Order! Order! Judge Banks banged his gavel. That's impossible, Daniel shouted. I signed the checks myself. You signed what Lila put in front of you, Alice said simply. You really should read what you signed, Daniel. Just like you should have read the prenup more carefully. The prenup protects me, Daniel yelled. Clause 14b, Alice recited from memory. The one you threw in my face. In the event of divorce, the spouse leaves with only the assets they brought into the marriage. Exactly, Cole shouted. You brought nothing. I brought the Zurich Angel Trust, Alice said. I owned it before we met. It is pre-marital property, and since the company is now in default to that trust, she leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Daniel's. The acceleration clause is active. I am calling the loan, Daniel. Right now, in front of everyone. You can't pay $40 million today, she whispered, which means, per the contract, the collateral serves as payment. The collateral is the company, Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. Yes, Alice said. I don't want half your company, Daniel. I'm taking all of it, because I brought the money that saved it. Therefore, under your own prenup, I leave with it. Cole was stunned. He looked at the papers in his hand. If she really was the investor, the prenup, the very weapon they used to hurt her, was now a guillotine hanging over Daniel's neck. This is absurd, Cole stammered. You need proof of identity. You need to prove you control that trust. You're just Alice Hale. Alice stood up. She looked at the bailiff. I would like to submit one final piece of evidence. My birth certificate. The real one. The bailiff took the document and handed it to the judge. Judge Banks adjusted his glasses. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at it again. His eyes went wide. He looked up at Alice with a completely new expression. Fear? Respect? Mr. Cole, the judge said, his voice unusually quiet. Come look at this. Cole walked up to the bench. He looked at the document. His face drained of all color. He stepped back as if he had been physically struck. Oh my God, Cole whispered. Read it, Alice commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of mountains. Read the name on the certificate, Mr. Cole. Tell the court who I am. Cole looked at Daniel, who was shaking. Then he looked at the press. The father's name. Cole's voice cracked. The father's name is Alexander Vanderbilt. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. Vanderbilt, someone whispered in the back. Like the railroads? Like the billionaires? And my mother, Alice added, was a Rothschild. She stepped down from the witness box and walked toward Daniel. I am not Alice Hale, she said, her voice freezing the air in the room. My name is Alice Vanderbilt Rothschild. I am the sole heir to two of the largest fortunes in history. My net worth isn't zero, Daniel. It's roughly $60 billion. She stood over him. He looked small, tiny. You threw me out because you thought I was poor, she said. You threw out a woman who could have bought your entire life with her pocket change. She turned to the stunned judge. I own the debt. I own the building. And as of 5 minutes ago, my lawyers in Zurich have executed the collateral seizure. I own Prescott Mining. She looked at Lila, who was crying, her makeup running. And regarding the embezzlement to Ms. Monroe's account, my team has already forwarded the evidence to the FBI. They are waiting in the lobby. Alice turned back to the camera. You wanted a show, Daniel? You wanted to show the world how you treat the help? She smiled, and it was terrifying. Class is dismissed. The courtroom was no longer a place of law. It was a crime scene. The air felt heavy, as if the sheer weight of the names Alice had just uttered, Vanderbilt and Rothschild, had altered the gravity of the room. Daniel Prescott didn't move. He sat frozen, his mouth slightly agape, looking at the woman he had treated like a servant for 3 years. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling sound came out. "Daniel," Harrison Cole hissed, tugging at his client's sleeve. "Daniel, we need to leave. Now." But Daniel couldn't leave. His legs felt like lead. He looked at the gallery. The shareholders who had once worshipped him were now looking at Alice with hungry, opportunistic eyes. They didn't see a waitress anymore. They saw the sun, and they were desperate to be in its orbit. "Your Honor," Alice said, turning back to Judge Banks, who was still staring at her birth certificate as if it were a holy relic. "Since the ownership of the debt and the underlying assets is no longer in question, I move for an immediate stay on the divorce proceedings until the criminal investigation into Ms. Monroe is completed. I grant the stay," Judge Banks stammered. He looked at Daniel with a mixture of pity and contempt. "Mr. Prescott, I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney. And Mr. Cole, I suggest you check your own firm's liability regarding these fraudulent filings." As the judge's gavel hit the wood, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. 4 men in dark suits, FBI agents, marched down the center aisle. Lila Monroe screamed. It was a high, thin sound that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "Daniel, do something!" she shrieked, as an agent reached for her arm. "Tell them it was your idea. Tell them you told me to move the money." Daniel looked at her, his eyes blank. He didn't even recognize her. The woman who had been his head of PR and secret lover was now just another liability in a life that was rapidly disintegrating. "Lila Monroe, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny," the lead agent said, his voice echoing. He didn't even look at Daniel. His eyes were on Alice. He gave her a sharp, respectful nod, a nod that confirmed she had been the one who handed them the file. As Lila was led out in handcuffs, sobbing and hurling insults at Daniel, Beatrice Prescott finally broke her silence. The queen mother of the Prescott family stood up, her face a mask of calculated regret. "Alice, darling," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness that made the skin crawl. "We clearly had a misunderstanding. The stress of the business, the pressure on Daniel. We weren't ourselves. Let's go back to the penthouse. We can talk this through as a family." Alice turned to her mother-in-law. For 3 years, Beatrice had made her feel small, pointing out her lack of breeding and her common manners. "The penthouse?" Alice asked. "Yes, dear. We'll have tea. We'll fix this." "You can't go to the penthouse, Beatrice," Alice said softly. "And why not?" "Because I bought the building this morning," Alice replied. "And I've already sent a specialized cleaning crew to remove the trash. Your belongings are currently being moved into a storage unit in New Jersey, a very cheap storage unit." Beatrice's face turned a shade of grey that matched the overcast sky outside. She collapsed back into her seat, the champagne and caviar life she had built on her son's stolen success vanishing in a single sentence. Alice walked over to Daniel. She leaned down, whispering so only he could hear. "You told me I leave with what I brought into the marriage, Daniel. I brought $40 million of my own blood and sweat. I brought a legacy you couldn't even dream of. I leave with my dignity. You leave with the Patek Philippe watch. It's on the counter, remember?" She stood up, straightened her blazer, and walked out of the courtroom. The reporters swarmed her, a sea of flashes and shouted questions, but she didn't stop. She walked straight to a waiting black Rolls-Royce, the real kind, with the tinted windows and the silent engine, where Arthur Sterling was holding the door. 24 hours later, the financial world was in a state of total upheaval. The Wall Street Journal headline read, "The Hidden Iris. Vanderbilt Rothschild Reclaims Empire." The stock for Prescott Mining had plummeted, then stabilized, and then surged to an all-time high as news broke that the company was being absorbed into Sterling Rothschild Holdings. Alice sat in a high-backed leather chair in a glass-walled office on the 80th floor of a building she now owned. Before her was a laptop showing the live feed of the New York Stock Exchange. "It's done," Arthur Sterling said, walking in with 2 glasses of scotch. "The board of directors voted unanimously this morning. Daniel Prescott has been removed as CEO with cause. No golden parachute, no severance. He's been barred from the building." Alice took a sip of the drink. It was a 50-year-old Macallan. It tasted like victory. "And the criminal charges?" she asked. "The FBI is looking into the bridge loan," Arthur said. "Since Daniel signed the documents claiming the funds were his own personal assets, which was a lie, they're looking at felony bank fraud. He's looking at 10 to 15 years. "Good." There was a knock on the door. A young assistant, looking terrified, stepped in. "Ms. Vanderbilt Rothschild, there is a man downstairs. He says he needs to see you. Security stopped him, but he's making a scene." "Daniel?" Alice guessed. "Yes, ma'am." Alice looked at Arthur. He shrugged. "Do you want me to have him removed?" "No," Alice said, standing up. "I want to see the look in his eyes when he realizes there is no way back." She went down to the lobby. The space was cavernous, filled with white marble and modern art. Daniel was standing near the security desk, looking disheveled. He hadn't shaved. His Tom Ford suit was wrinkled, and his tie was missing. He looked like a man who had been awake for a century. When he saw her, he tried to rush forward, but 2 massive security guards blocked his path. "Alice! Alice, please!" he yelled. "I know I messed up. I was blinded. Lila! She manipulated me. She was the one who pushed for the divorce. I still love you." Alice stopped 10 feet away from him. The lobby was full of employees, all of them watching the fallen king beg. "You don't love me, Daniel," she said, her voice cool and echoing. "You love the idea of power, and when you thought I had none, you threw me away like a used napkin. You didn't even give me a coat in the rain. I was wrong. I'll do anything. I'll work for you. I know the company better than anyone." "You don't know the company at all," Alice interrupted. "You didn't even know who your own wife was. You lived with me for 5 years, and you never once looked at me. You only looked at your reflection in the mirror." She took a step closer, her heels clicking on the marble. "I didn't stay with you for your money, Daniel. I stayed because I thought you were a man of character. I watched you turn into a monster of greed. I stayed to see if there was any soul left in you. The night you threw me out, I got my answer." Daniel fell to his knees. It was a pathetic sight. "Please, Alice, I have nothing. They froze my personal accounts. I can't even pay my lawyer." Alice looked down at him. She felt no pity, only a profound sense of closure. "I'm a Vanderbilt, Daniel. We don't forgive. We just settle the books." She turned to the security guards. "Show him the exit, and if he ever sets foot on any property owned by my family again, have him arrested for trespassing." As they dragged Daniel toward the revolving doors, Alice turned her back. She didn't look at him as he screamed her name. She didn't look as the cameras caught his final humiliation. She walked back to the elevators. As the doors closed, she saw her reflection in the polished gold of the lift. She didn't see a waitress. She didn't see a victim. She saw a woman who had finally claimed her throne. The transition from a woman who was nothing to a woman who owned everything was not as loud as the newspapers made it out to be. For Alice Vanderbilt Rothschild, the year following the trial was a study in silence, a profound, expensive, and restorative quiet. While the world's financial markets reeled from her emergence and the collapse of the Prescott name, Alice had retreated to a sanctuary of her own making. She sat on the expansive limestone terrace of her estate in the Hudson Valley. This was not a glass and steel penthouse designed to intimidate visitors. It was a sprawling, historic manor of fieldstone and oak, hidden behind 3 miles of private road and a security detail that was more sophisticated than that of some small nations. The air here didn't smell of New York exhaust and ambition. It smelled of damp cedar, wood smoke, and the turning of the seasons. Alice leaned back in a hand-carved Adirondack chair, a cashmere throw draped over her knees. In her hand was a thick, cream-colored envelope that had been delivered by a private courier. It was the final report from the liquidators regarding the estate of Daniel Prescott. She opened it, not with the hunger of a predator, but with the detached curiosity of an accountant. Daniel's fall had been total. The court had not been kind to a man who had attempted to use the legal system to facilitate what amounted to corporate theft. After the FBI moved in, the house of cards collapsed. The investigation into the Zurich Angel loan had revealed a web of lies Daniel had told his own board of directors. To save face, he had forged signatures and manipulated stock values. When Alice, the actual owner of that debt, called in the collateral, she hadn't just taken his company. She had taken his immunity. Daniel had been sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. The report mentioned that he was currently in a medium security facility in Pennsylvania. He had tried to file for bankruptcy to protect his remaining personal assets, but the civil suits Alice's team had launched on behalf of the defrauded shareholders had stripped him to the bone. Even the Patek Philippe watch he had tried to throw at her during the eviction had been seized by the feds as part of his restitution. Alice turned the page to find a smaller, handwritten note tucked inside. It was from the warden's office, a courtesy notification that a prisoner had attempted to send her mail. Daniel had written to her 7 times in the last 3 months. The notes were always the same, a mixture of frantic apologies, recollections of their better times, and eventually the inevitable plea for her to use her influence to move him to a cushier facility. She didn't ask to see the letters. She didn't need to read his words to know they were hollow. Daniel Prescott didn't regret hurting her. He regretted being caught by someone more powerful than him. To him, love was always a transaction, and he was simply devastated that he had lost the trade. Then there was Beatrice. The grande dame of New York society had become its most cautionary tale. Alice had been surgical in her treatment of her former mother-in-law. She hadn't sent her to jail. That would have been too merciful. Instead, Alice had ensured that the social world Beatrice valued more than life itself became a vacuum. No one took her calls. No one invited her to the galas. The boutiques on Fifth Avenue that used to close their doors so she could shop in private now respectfully declined. Her credit cards. Beatrice was living in a small, 2-bedroom apartment in a nondescript part of Queens. It was clean, it was safe, but to a woman who once measured her worth by the height of her ceiling and the vintage of her wine, it was a tomb. She spent her days writing a memoir that no publisher would touch because the Vanderbilt Rothschild legal department had sent a preemptive, friendly reminder to every major house in the country regarding the laws of defamation and NDAs. Alice sipped her tea, her eyes tracking a red-tailed hawk circling over the valley. The sound of a gravel-crunching car interrupted her thoughts. A silver SUV pulled into the circular drive, and Arthur Sterling stepped out. He looked tired but energized, his briefcase bulging with the weight of a dozen new acquisitions. "The London markets are closed," Arthur said, walking onto the terrace and helping himself to a seat. The rebranding is complete. Prescott Mining is officially history. The new entity, Vanderbilt Ecological, is now the primary partner for the EU's Green Energy Initiative. He looked at Alice, his eyes softening. You've done more in 12 months than Daniel did in a decade. You didn't just take his company, Alice. You fixed it. I didn't do it to fix it, Arthur, she said softly. I did it because it belonged to me. My father's side of the family built this country on railroads and steel. My mother's side built it on banking. They were ruthless, yes, but they were never small. Daniel was small. He thought power was about shouting and throwing people out into the rain. He never understood that true power is the ability to change the world without saying a word. Arthur nodded, pulling a final document from his bag. There's one last thing. The penthouse on Fifth Avenue. The renovations are finished. The Beatrice aesthetic has been completely gutted. It's yours whenever you want it. Alice looked at the document, the deed to the place where she had once been treated like a servant in her own home. She thought about the white marble floors, the gold leaf ceilings, and the heavy oak door that had slammed shut behind her that rainy October night. Sell it, Alice said. Arthur paused, his pen mid-air. Sell it. It's arguably the most valuable piece of residential real estate in the Western Hemisphere. Sell it, she repeated, a ghost of a smile on her lips, and donate the proceeds to the Hale Foundation. I want it to go toward building shelters for women who have been displaced by domestic and financial abuse. I want them to have a place to go when they think they have nothing left. Arthur stared at her for a long moment, then smiled. The Hale name. Your stepfather's name. He was the only man who ever loved me when I actually had nothing, Alice said. Daniel married a waitress for her beauty and threw her out for her lack of status. My stepfather took in an orphan and gave her a name when he had nothing but a toolbox. The foundation will carry the name of a good man, the Vanderbilt name. That's just for the boardrooms. As Arthur left to execute her orders, the sun began to dip below the ridge of the Hudson Highlands, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. Alice stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a character in someone else's story. She wasn't a waitress, she wasn't a victim, and she wasn't just a secret heiress. She was a woman who had survived the storm by becoming the storm itself. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, cheap burner phone she had used that night at the bus stop. It was dead now, the battery long since drained. She looked at it for a moment, remembering the girl in the beige trench coat who had shivered in the rain, wondering if she would ever feel warm again. She placed the phone on the stone ledge and walked back into her house, leaving the past behind her in the dark. And that is the story of how the world's most powerful family hid in plain sight, and what happens when you mistake a lioness for a lamb. Daniel Prescott thought he was discarding a woman with no value, only to realize he had thrown away the very thing that kept him alive. It's a reminder that you never truly know who is standing across from you, and that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you choose to ignore. If you enjoyed this story of justice, power, and the ultimate comeback, make sure to hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the lives of the world's most mysterious elite. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that your worth isn't defined by what you have, but by who you are. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.